The desert sun in Bahrain doesn't care about our narratives. It doesn't care about the headlines, the social media predictions, or the noise of 1,000 paddock opinions clashing under the relentless heat. While the world was looking for fireworks, waiting for that one explosive purple sector lap that would make everyone jump out of their seats, something much more significant was happening in the shimmering haze of the international circuit. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It happened quietly, methodically, lap after lap after lap. What if the most dangerous development of the 2026 season occurred in almost total silence, and nearly everyone missed it? We were all told to expect a struggle. The narrative was simple. Lewis Hamilton arrives at Ferrari and faces the steep climb of adapting to a brand new philosophy and the most radical engine regulations in a decade. We expected a honeymoon period filled with growing pains, but as the SF26 rolled out onto that wind-swept track, it didn't bite back. It didn't snap at its driver or refuse to settle. Instead, it stayed calm, and Hamilton didn't spend his time wrestling it into submission. He spent his time listening to it. For those of you who have watched this sport for 30 years, you know the feeling of watching a car that is truly on the nose. You know that the most terrifying thing a rival can see in February isn't a fluke lap record. It's a car that looks like it's travelling on rails while the asphalt is melting. The SF26 has become a ghost in the testing data, a machine that seems to dictate its own terms. While the rest of the grid was chasing balance, Hamilton was beginning a deep technical conversation with a machine that finally seems to be listening. If you've been around long enough to see the great eras of dominance begin, you recognize this specific brand of silence. It's the sound of a storm that hasn't broken yet, but you can already feel the pressure changing in the air. This isn't just about a driver in a new red suit. It's about a fundamental shift in power. Everyone was looking for a crack in the armor of a champion entering his twilight years. Instead, the data told a story of surgical precision. There were no spikes in the telemetry, no sudden corrections on the exit of turn 4. If you've seen how Michael Schumacher used to settle a car, or how Lewis himself looked in 2014, you know that look of absolute harmony. The SF26 wasn't just fast, it was behaving, and a Lewis Hamilton who finally trusts the car beneath him is the one thing the rest of the grid was hoping they would never have to face again. While the world stared at the timing screens, Nico Rosberg was looking at something far more intimate. Rosberg is a forensic witness to the genius of Lewis Hamilton. For 4 years, they shared the same garage and the same data. Rosberg knows what Lewis looks like when he's merely surviving a difficult car and what he looks like when he is merged with one. During the frustrating years at Mercedes, we saw Lewis fighting, the constant frantic micro-corrections as he wrestled with a machine that refused to obey him. But as Rosberg watched the onboard footage from Bahrain in February 2026, his reaction wasn't just interest. It was a deep, quiet recognition. He noticed the hands first. Bahrain is famous for unpredictable crosswinds that can unsettle even the most stable car. While other drivers were soaring at the wheel, Hamilton's inputs were eerily calm. He wasn't chasing the pace, he was building it. Rosberg recognized the pattern of a driver who is already beginning to dominate his environment. When you've been in the trenches with a teammate like Lewis, you learn to spot the moment the hesitation disappears and the car becomes an extension of his own nervous system. To the untrained eye, it looked like a standard test run. To Rosberg, it looked like a declaration of war. The most terrifying part involved the SF26's technical DNA. Internally, it's known to have an incredibly narrow operating window. It is a car built on a razor's edge. Under these new 2026 regulations, finding that sweet spot usually takes a driver months. Yet, by the end of day 2, Lewis seemed to have already solved the puzzle. This shift changes the entire atmosphere of the Ferrari garage. For years, Maranello was a place of doubt, but Rosberg saw the confirmation in the telemetry. When a driver of Hamilton's caliber finds that sweet spot this early, he stops being a passenger and becomes the architect. He begins telling the engineers what the car will do. Rosberg knows that when Lewis stops fighting the machine and starts commanding it, the rest of the grid is already behind. To understand why the paddock shifted from curiosity to concern, you have to look into the digital heart of the SF26. The 2026 regulations represent a radical engine reset, moving to a 50-50 split between fuel power and electrical energy. In this era, the Holy Grail is harvesting and deploying that electricity efficiently. While most teams are still struggling to balance these two worlds, Ferrari seems to have found a generational leap. Early analysis suggests the SF26 has a 30% advantage in energy efficiency. This is a total game changer. While other drivers are forced to lift and coast to save battery, Lewis can stay on the power longer, attacking when everyone else is forced to defend. This technical edge was proven through a display of sheer mechanical resilience. On the final day of testing, Lewis completed 149 laps, more than 2.5 race distances in the triple-digit desert heat. You don't push a brand new, complex machine for 150 laps unless you are absolutely certain it won't break. It sent a chilling message. The Ferrari is already bulletproof. Nowhere was this more obvious than in the third sector of the Bahrain circuit. Historically, this traction-limited zone was Ferrari's Achilles' heel. But the SF26 was biting into the asphalt with surgical precision. Every time Lewis hit the accelerator, the power deployment was seamless. There was no wheel spin, no drama. When a car handles Sector 3 with that much composure, it tells you the suspension and power unit are working in perfect harmony. This marks a profound shift in Hamilton's career. For years, critics called him a pilot of superior machinery, but now we are seeing the architect. He is actively shaping the machine's evolution. Every time he pits, the feedback is about making strengths even more devastating. He is deep in the data, making micro-adjustments to the brake balance and fine-tuning how the differential handles sweeping corners. Inside Maranello, the engineers aren't looking for fixes, they are looking for optimizations. Ferrari has moved past the stage of doubt and entered a phase of pure refinement, which is a luxury their rivals currently don't have. When you look at the rest of the grid, the contrast is startling. While Ferrari polishes a diamond, others are digging theirs out of the rough. Red Bull has been visibly struggling with a car that looks nervous and unpredictable over the bumps. Other teams are reporting massive spikes with the new active Aerodynamics, which can make the car feel buffeted by an invisible hand mid-corner. In the 2026 era, active Aero is a monster to tame. The car has to adjust its front and rear wing flaps on every lap to balance high-speed drag reduction on straights with maximum downforce in corners. If the synchronization is off by even a millisecond, the car becomes a nightmare to drive. While Mercedes and Red Bull engineers were seen frantically checking their sensors, Hamilton's SF26 transitioned between these modes with the fluidity of a living, breathing organism. Furthermore, the new overtake mode dynamics have added a layer of psychological warfare that Hamilton is already exploiting. Under these rules, being within 1 second of a rival grants extra electrical boost, a digital weapon to be deployed strategically. In testing simulations, Lewis wasn't just checking the car's speed, he was practicing the harvest and hold strategy, showing he can defend his battery charge better than the younger generation. It's a subtle flex that hasn't gone unnoticed. He is teaching the grid that in 2026, raw speed is nothing without the intellect to manage the energy behind it. As we look ahead, this leads us into 3 possibilities. First, the math of the eighth. If that 30% efficiency gap holds true, the fight for the title might stop being a question of if and start being a question of when. Lewis isn't just chasing a record, he is being carried toward it by a superior mathematical advantage. The 8th World Championship starts to look like an inevitability, a calculated, unstoppable march toward history. However, F1 is never that simple. This brings us to the razor's edge. For all its brilliance, the SF26 is sensitive. It operates in a very narrow window. One sudden drop in track temperature during a night race or a stray rain shower could push the car right out of its sweet spot. If the car is only untouchable when conditions are perfect, then the championship becomes a high-stakes gamble against the elements. One small mistake or a shift in the weather could leave the fastest car on the grid with nowhere to hide. Finally, consider the grid's counterstrike. The paddock was far from blind. Every engineer at McLaren, Mercedes and Red Bull was watching those long runs. They aren't going to sit still. The signal Hamilton sent from Bahrain acts as a giant target painted on the back of the SF26. Teams like Mercedes now led by the hungry Kimi Antonelli, are working 24-hour shifts to bring updates by April. They are dissecting Ferrari's efficiency and looking for the kill switch. The battle we saw in testing was just the opening move, and the real question is whether Ferrari's head start is big enough to survive the most intense development war we've ever seen. Ultimately, Nico Rosberg's reaction isn't born out of hype. It's hard-earned recognition. He has seen this look in Lewis's eyes before, in 2014 and 2020, moments right before the rest of the world realized they were already playing for second place. When a man who pushed his own mind to the limit just to beat Lewis once tells you to pay attention, you listen. Rosberg understands that when Lewis stops wrestling with a machine and starts trusting it, the entire nature of the competition shifts. This wasn't just a successful week of testing. It was a warning shot fired by a driver who finally has the tools to finish what he started. As the dust settles in Bahrain and the teams pack away their data, we are left with one massive question. Is the SF26 a genuine masterpiece or the most expensive pre-season illusion in F1 history? In this sport, the truth has a way of hiding behind lap times until the lights go out. But if the patterns we saw in the desert are real, and if the stability of that red car holds up under pressure, then we aren't just looking at another season of racing. We are looking at the beginning of a historic final chapter. The signal has been sent. The rest of the grid is officially on notice. But what do you think? Did Bahrain show us the first chapter of an 8th World Championship story? Or was it just a desert mirage that will vanish the moment the real racing begins? Drop your prediction in the comments below. Is the 8th title now a mathematical calculation, or is it still just a dream? Join the debate, share this with every F1 fan who needs to see the data, and stay locked in, because the battle for the future of Formula One has only just begun. It's time to see if the silence of Bahrain was truly the calm before the storm.